Dear student friends, welcome to the digital platform of e-learning provided by MSBTE, that is Maharashtra State Board of Technical Education, whose lead is Study at Your Doorstep. Now today's subject of discussion is Environmental Studies, whose course code is 22447. Now topic of discussion today is topic number 3, that is ecosystem and biodiversity. The relevant CO, that is the course outcome, is conserve ecosystem and biodiversity. The subsequent LO, that is learning outcome desired from this study, is suggest methods of biodiversity conservation. It's me, Mr. Ananta Fuljale, lecturer, Government Polytechnic, Nagpur. What we will learn today. So here some agenda points have been given as first, conservation of biodiversity, then second, objects of conservation, then third, various laws for conservation of biodiversity. To start with, we shall first have a look over concept map. Now, biodiversity conservation is having two types. First one is in situ conservation and second is ex situ conservation. Now, in situ conservation, we adopt national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and biosphere reserve. The ex situ conservation is accompanied by botanical gardens, zoological parks, and seed or gene banks. Biodiversity conservation, we shall discuss. The hope for conservation of natural biodiversity rests on preservation of selected ecosystems and representative areas of different vegetation types in the country, as well as on saving some of the extinction prone species. The number of endangered species of plants and animals is on the rise, which has prompted government and non-governmental organizations to take certain steps. In this direction, forestry and wildlife were primarily under the control of state governments, but later on looking to the gravity of the situation, a separate Ministry of Environment and Forest was established. Now we shall come to aims and objectives of wildlife management in India, which includes four components. First one is protection of natural habitats. Second one is maintenance of viable number of species. Third one is establishment of biosphere reserves. And next is protection through legislation. Now we come to laws governing biodiversity conservation in India. So here some of the laws which have been framed for conservation of biodiversity is given. The Madras Wild Elephant Preservation Act 1873, All India Elephant Preservation Act 1879, the Indian Fisheries Act 1897, Wild Birds and Wild Animals Protection Act 1912, the Indian Forest Act 1927, and so on. And the latest one is Conservation of Forest and National Ecosystem Act 1994. Now we shall discuss in situ and ex situ conservation of biodiversity. The goal of biodiversity conservation can be attained in a number of ways. The concept of gene banks regulates all these methods. So, we will study in situ conservation. It can be defined as the conservation of plants and animals in their native ecosystem, that is their natural habitats, or even man-made ecosystem where they naturally occur. This type of conservation is applicable to wild flora and fauna, as conservation is achieved through protection of populations in their natural ecosystem. The concept of protected areas falls under these categories. In situ conservation, for example, we provide national parks, sanctuaries, and biosphere reserves to protect the wildlife. Okay. Here is the map of India has been given, which shows the wildlife reserves located in various parts of India. So wildlife sanctuaries, okay, and national parks and bird sanctuaries. So they have been given. From examination point of view, this is very important because questions are asked regarding the location of various national parks, sanctuaries, and biosphere reserves. Next is ex situ conservation. It can be defined as the conservation of plants and animals away from their natural habitats. It includes collection of sample of genetic diversity and their treatment in the laboratory where they are cultured. The concept of gene banks has primarily become the talk for ex situ conservation, as it is important for conservation of agricultural crops and forestry based afforestation programs. Genetic resource centers fall under this category and include botanical gardens, zoological parks, seed banks, and gene banks. So in ex situ conservation include all these types which have been given in picture form. Now distribution between national park, sanctuary and biosphere reserve for in situ conservation. So here some points of comparison have been given between national park, sanctuary and biosphere reserves. National parks are associated to the habitat of wild animal species like rhino, tiger, lion, etc. But in sanctuary, these are species oriented as pitcher plant, Indian bustard bird. In biosphere reserve, it takes into consideration the entire ecosystem. The size range is 0.04 to 3162 square kilometer for national park. It is 0.61 to 7818 square kilometer for sanctuary, and it is 5670 square kilometer for biosphere reserve. So area goes on increasing. Okay. Next is boundaries marked by legislation for national park. Boundaries are not sacrosanct for sanctuary. Boundaries marked by legislation for biosphere reserves. Disturbance only limited to buffer zone in national park, limited disturbance in sanctuary, and disturbance only limited to buffer zone in biosphere reserve. In national park, tourism is allowed as so as the case with sanctuary, but in biosphere reserve, tourism generally not allowed. Scientific management is lacking in national park. Scientific management also is lacking in sanctuary, but in biosphere reserves, it is scientifically managed. No attention is paid to gene pool conservation in national park. Same as no attention is paid to gene pool conservation also in sanctuary, but in biosphere reserve attention is paid. Now national park. we shall discuss regarding national park. According to the Indian Board for Wildlife, a national park is an area dedicated by statute for all time to conserve the scenery, natural and historical objects, to conserve the wildlife therein, and to provide for enjoyment of the same in such manner and by such means that will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations with such modification as local conditions may demand. The history of national park in India begins in 1936 when the Heli, now Corbett National Parks of United Provinces, now Uttar Pradesh, was created. The area is declared for the protection and preservation for all time of wild animal life and wild vegetation for the benefit and advantage and enjoyment of the general public. In this area, hunting of fauna or collection of flora is prohibited except under the direction of park authority. There are 104 existing national parks in India covering about an area of 40,501.13 square kilometer, which is 1.23% of the geographical area of the country. Next, we shall discuss sanctuary. The Indian Board for Wildlife has defined a sanctuary as an area where killing, hunting, shooting, or capturing of any species of bird or animal is prohibited, except by or under the control of highest authority in the department responsible for the management of the sanctuary and whose boundaries and character should be sacrosanct as far as possible. By June 1992, India had 416 sanctuaries. The board has further clarified the position by stating that while the management of sanctuaries does not involve suspension or restriction of normal forest operation, it is desirable to assign a completely sacrosanct area within a sanctuary to be known as Abhyaranya. It has also indicated that sanctuaries should be made accessible to the public. Wildlife sanctuaries of India are classified as IUCN Category 4 protected areas. Between 1936 and 2016, 543 wildlife sanctuaries were established in the country that cover 118,918 square kilometer, that is 45,940 square mile as of 2017. Now some important wildlife reserve and sanctuaries are listed which are existing in India. You have to study these wildlife reserves and the state in which they are located because this is important from the examination point of view. Now we shall discuss biosphere reserves. Biosphere reserves have been described as undisturbed natural areas for scientific study as well as areas in which conditions of disturbance are under control. These serve as the centers for ecological research and habitat protection. The biosphere consists of two main zones, core area and buffer zone. Here in this picture, the different zones have been described. So this central green is the core area where no human interference is allowed. The adjoining blue area is the buffer zone where research and education is allowed. And the circumferential white area is the transition zone, which is area of cooperation. Presently, there are 18 notified biosphere reserves in India. Now, important biosphere reserves in India has been listed as given in this table. So, this is also important from the examination point of view. So, you have to study the different biosphere reserve and the states in which they are located. Now some special projects are there. First special project of conservation is Project Tiger. A fast decline of the tiger population led to the setup of Special Task Force in 1970 by the Indian Board for Wildlife. It prepared an action plan to conserve the tiger population in India. As a result, Project Tiger was launched on 1st April 1973. Second special project is regarding Gir Lion project. The Asiatic lion is now confined to the Gir forest of Gujarat. The sanctuary harbored nearly 200 of them. The great reduction in the number was due to the increased threat from overgrazing, depletion of prey species, etc. The Asiatic lion was in danger of being wiped out either due to starvation, epidemics, or human interference. In 1972, the state government prepared a scheme for the management of the Gir Lion Sanctuary with proper guidelines for conservation. The center provided assistance for the protection and improvement of the habitat. Next special project was regarding Himalayan musk deer project. The musk deer, which was once found throughout the Himalayan tract, has terribly suffered due to its musk being used in the preparation of perfumes and medicine. Secondly, the habitat destruction brought about a sharp decline in their population. A conservation project was therefore launched at the Kedarnath Sanctuary in UP. Musk deer is the Kasturi Mrug. Crocodile breeding project. The three varieties of crocodile population, viz. Ghadial, the mugger, and the saltwater crocodile, witnessed a sharp decline by the early 1970s. With the assistance of the UNDP, the Government of India launched a crocodile breeding and management project. Next was the Project Elephant. It was launched with a view to protect and conserve the elephant population of the country. Project Elephant aimed at restoring degraded habitats of elephants, creation of migration corridors, elimination of human interference, and establishment of a database on the migration and population dynamics of elephants. For example, elephant habitat restoration work was done in Rajaji National Park. Now we have come to the end of this session. We can summarize what we have studied. We have studied the conservation of biodiversity, then its object, then various laws, then in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. Here are some standard books which we can use as references for your further studies. Thank you all. Have a nice day.